All right, so the weatherman says that expect some more rains in Nairobi and some parts of the country for the next coming days, and then expect some sun in some parts of the country for the next coming days. So the parts that are going to experience rain are Nairobi and areas around Nairobi, and areas, you know, the way the weatherman says, east and south of the Rift Valley and west of the lowlands and skies.
Yes, and the southerly winds and what have you, yes.
Those things.
But essentially it'll be raining in those areas.
It'll be raining. Parts of the country where it'll be raining, Nairobi included. What we've seen with that recent rains in Nairobi is they've exposed a lot about our built environment. We have seen water getting into people's homes. We have seen buildings collapsing, a building collapsing, and then we're hearing the preliminary investigation and report indicating some structural issues that made an entire block of apartments start crumbling and coming down. We've been seeing these things happening around our city. The question is this, as we see more and more rain, more and more flooding, as we then maybe get to a place where it gets more and more heat, and then maybe at some point now Rift Valley is creating its own, around Maimahi and Nakuru, it's creating its own continent. There are serious fissures on the earth and splits. All these things mean something. So what do we need to do and think about how you're building all our buildings and our estates and basically our built environment? An architect has joined us for that conversation. Architect Emmanuel Gono is from the Architects Association. Good morning.
Good morning, Eric.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Thank you.
How does it feel?
It feels hot. Right.
Karibu sana.
Thank you.
Listen to CT. He will give you the day's proverb.
Yep.
This week he has a new set of proverbs from a West African country, and this country is
Liberia. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It is better to fall while sitting than to fall while standing.
It is better to fall while sitting than to fall while standing. Architect, what's your interpretation of this proverb?
Very interesting. If I were to convert it into actual construction terms, then the standing person would be a tall building, a skyscraper, and the sitting person would be a bungalow or some low-lying building. And so it's better for that one to fall than the high building. Yeah.
But why do you think they'd say this? Why do you think... What are they actually saying? We had a conversation the last hour with Jeremiah Kioni, and he just couldn't come around to thinking, what's this proverb about? Because we know the other proverb, it's better to die standing than to die kneeling. So why are they inverting this?
I think that what they are trying to say is when you're standing, you're making yourself exposed, and you're trying to be that strong. And because of that, whatever is bringing you down will give you more problems than if you are sitting and lying low. We have this story about lying low like an envelope. So when you are the envelope, when the typhoon comes, you're not likely to be affected as much as the person who is standing.
Interesting.
That's my thought on it.
You know, one of the things we have found about this proverb is when you ask people to give you their take on it, you always come across an interpretation you could never have thought of.
And it's always interesting to have the various different perspectives.
Yes, it is.
It's the beauty of proverbs.
It is.
So, Architect Gono, the Architects Association, we know the Architectural Association of Kenya. Is this the opposition?
Well, actually, the Architects Alliance is an association that deals specifically with architects. The Architectural Association of Kenya is an umbrella organization that has architects, has quantity surveyors, has engineers, it has planners, it has all those things. So we are all part of the Architectural Association of Kenya, but the Architects Alliance specifically works in the space of architects, and especially trying to bring out the role of the architect and what role we can play in making society as a whole better and having our voice heard on issues that are relevant to the built environment. So that's what the Architects Alliance is about.
Okay.
It is not an opposition, it's actually part of the umbrella.
It's a composite part of this.
Oh, yes.
Who's an architect?
Well, an architect is a person who is able to understand the art and science around creating buildings and the built environment as a whole. So basically, the architect will be given a problem to solve. Somebody has a certain budget, he has a certain site, he wants to achieve a certain space. For instance, if you wanted to achieve a studio, the requirements are different from the person who wanted to do a discotheque, for instance. So the architect is able to get all this data, all this information, and come up with a solution that uniquely satisfies the requirements of that particular client. That is the role of an architect.
So what do? You draw the building?
You start from actually listening to the client and understanding what they want, what their desires are, and create what is called a design brief. So the design brief says what problem is to be solved. Once you have agreed on that, you then come to proposals of what can be done, and then produce it in forms that the client can understand. When you get from that step, then you reach to the trying to make that thing buildable. You bring in the structural engineers, the other team members, and at the same time, then you prepare the drawings which can be submitted to the local authority for approval and other statutory bodies. And then you go to site, help the client in getting an appropriate contractor, supervise the construction until it's completed. It's a whole suite of work.
When you're managing this space,
yes,
what other consideration must you have beyond what the client wants?
Well, of course, you have to consider the statutory environment. And then you have to look at the physical environment, like what we've been talking about, climate. Now we are thinking about climate resilience. So the client may not be aware that where they are building, there's a risk of floods happening many years down the line. So those are some of the things then the architect needs to think about and consider, and then build into his design.
So what knowledge do you need to have then? As you are interpreting the client's wishes.
Yes.
I heard you talking about the regulatory framework.
Correct.
Okay, so you need to know the law.
Yes.
Yeah, I have heard you talking about the structural frameworks. You need to know. Do you need to then also understand the nature of rock that is here, the nature of soil?
Very, very true. You need to have, as an architect, you need to have a very wide array of information and knowledge. You have to know a bit about structures. You need to know about the environment, what kind of substructure of soil you are building on, what kind of flora and fauna are in that environment. You have to have a wide range of knowledge. Of course, you have to know a bit about finances, because sometimes your client wants to get financing for his project. So it's a wide range of things that you need to know. So usually the architect is the lead consultant in this team, which has engineers, has quantity surveyors, has many other people.
Whenever one hears of an architect and one hears of what it is that they do, you then ask, so what would somebody who is in a rural setting and who has built a house, they never require your services, and yet they build houses that they live in. How would the services, the knowledge that an architect like yourself have, how would it improve on the dwellings in such places?
Thank you very much for that question. It's very interesting. Just 2 days ago, I was at a conference for the Certified Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, and the Chief Justice was there. And she said that only 10% of people in Kenya get access to justice. They are able to go and take their matters to court so that they're heard. The rest of the 90% are floating somewhere out there. I think in our space, it's even less. There's smaller population who is able to access architectural services. But they also need those services. What in some jurisdictions is done, there's the various levels. So you see, like the architect who is registered usually has a university degree, has studied for about 6 years, and then after that internship for 2-3 years, and then done an exam and all that. That level may not be necessary for a bungalow in the rural areas. However, there are people who have done, say, a diploma in architecture who are also in this country. That would be the space in which they would occupy. It doesn't mean that if you have a bungalow in rural areas, I can't design it for you. I can, and I will be able to give advice, but it's a little bit of an overkill. So to answer your question, we need to have various levels of people who then become relevant to every
Are you
person.
suggesting the people who live in the rural areas don't want or don't need to live in the sort of houses that you built in urban areas? That they need a lesser qualified individual to design these houses for them because the habitation needs to be of a lesser quality? Is that what you're saying?
Not exactly. Yes, indeed, it's the same way if you are to look at, for instance, medicine. You have somebody who can go to a clinical officer. A well-qualified clinical officer can give you the services to a certain level that even a doctor can give you. So that's what I mean. It is possible for somebody in the rural areas to do a house which will cost him $500,000 and use my services. But it's likely to be a bit more expensive and availability may not be as good, but it's still available. But if we have those who are slightly less qualified, they can be able to perform those tasks to almost the same level as an architect would do.
Given the training that you have,
Yes.
beyond just designing,
Yes,
you also understand quantities.
correct.
You also understand materials.
Yes.
Now, aside from the designing, are you not probably the best placed people to understand, because you work within a built environment and you manage space? Would you then not be the person who would be best placed to advise on the sort of material that one could use in that setting, which would be cost effective, and we also would provide them with the sort of shelter that is not too far removed from the shelters that we have? I'm not leaving this thing in a moment, so
Yes. Well, you're actually very right, because if you are, say, in a rural setting, I think what happens, I remember when I was in college, we read some book called Shelter in Africa by a lady called Susan Denya. And the thinking was then that in Africa, what you are thinking of is shelter. That is risky, because you're thinking of a shed. But where you're coming from is that somebody in that rural setting needs the same kind of quality that somebody in an urban setting would need.
Exactly.
Even though the level of complexity of his project may not be as high, but he deserves to get the same quality. In that sense, I would agree with you that my services would be useful for such a person.
Okay.
Yes.
So if you can correct me, what I'm understanding by the example that you've given of a clinical officer going all the way to a doctor and into a specialist,
Correct.
right? If we talk about the specialist being a senior architect, I'm sure there are ranks in architecture,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Practicing and consulting architects.
Correct.
And then, so the lower one would be somebody who has studied architecture, but with, say, a diploma.
Yes.
Like the Nairobi Institute of Technology, when you've had them here, they
Yes.
talked about one of the courses they offer
is a diploma
in architecture.
Yes.
So that person
Yes.
is the one that you're saying they are still qualified enough,
Yes.
but their fee
Yes.
would then make it more affordable
Yeah.
for somebody who does not have the money to afford you.
Yes. In addition to that, in an ideal situation, they should be more than architects.
Okay.
But that's not what is obtaining in Kenya, unfortunately.
Right.
In an ideal situation, you'll have a pyramid with the architects at the apex, and then you have all these other qualifications down there. So then that means you can have architectural services available for everybody at the level that is most comfortable for them in terms of where they are and what their budget points are.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the kind of speciality that
That is needed.
that is needed
Yes,
in
correct.
the particular one.
Yes.
Now, in the built environment,
Yes.
as you're dealing, for example, with providing services in a city such as Nairobi, what do you look at in terms of regulation? Do you look at the plan that's in place, and then what factors go into when you're designing this? When you're looking, okay, so this is the master plan for the city. This is the level of service that you have in the city in terms of sewer connections, in terms of power, in terms of water, in terms of roads, access, roads and infrastructure. What are those things that you look at, and how do they impact on what you end up producing?
Yes, of course, the master plan for Nairobi is an interesting thing. As we speak, there is what is referred to as the new plan, which was done, and it was a generalized plan for Nairobi. But then after that, all the neighborhoods were supposed to have local plans. And in that plan is where now your particular project in a particular parcel of land would fit in. Unfortunately, that has not been done. So what's happened, part of that is what results in the kind of chaos, if you call it, that we sometimes see in various neighborhoods. In an ideal situation, we would have a plan and almost like a jigsaw. And in that, you will see how you will fit in. If you put your piece in, it will align with all the other things. It will align with the roads. It will align with the sewer systems. It will align with even stormwater drainage and all the systems. Unfortunately, for now, within Nairobi, we haven't thought deeply about this. And this is something as the Architects Alliance that pains us deeply. As part of trying to look at this challenge for Nairobi, we went all the way back to what happened in 1993. And that's when there was Mayor Steve Magic. I'm sure, City, you remember him.
Oh, I remember Mwangi.
Yes. And Mwangi got together, and it's surprising that such a thing happened during those times when devolution had not taken place, all these other things had not, the space,
New constitution.
Yeah, the new constitution was not there. And this guy came and said, we want the Nairobi we want. How will it be? And they went asking people all around to contribute. And there was a conference that came up with proposals. So when we were trying to look for this document, City, I can tell you I was shocked. I tried to look for it in the local libraries. It's not there.
The archives?
The archives is not there. So I found that it is available in American universities. It's in various places. Now the latest is that somebody has promised to get it to fly it for me from Bonn. That's where it's available. Here it's not here. That's 30 years ago.
And this is for Nairobi?
This is for Nairobi.
It's in Germany?
It's in Germany. And it is not here. And this was us trying to see how our city should be. So, of course, after that, we threw it out the window, started doing our things the way we do. The term would be kienyeji. And we are here where we are. So what we are saying as the Architects Alliance, we don't want 30 years from today people to be saying Nairobi is this and that. And let's look at the past, let's look at the present, and let's see how all this can be fitted together so we create a master plan where everybody will fit in properly. If you look at the kind of problems we had with the flooding, these are things which could have been foreseen. We've had Nairobi was known as the green city in the sun. Those green neighborhoods are the ones that would absorb most of the water, so the water doesn't run off. You turn it into concrete, you turn it into asphalt, then all that water runs off and it goes and it finds its way. And if your house is on the way, it will sweep it aside. So these are the things we need to think about, Eric, as a country.
You said that client first port of call is architect.
Correct.
Architect takes in all this. Architect brings in the expertise that they have.
Correct.
And then they draw the solution.
Yes.
And this is a solution that will be submitted to the authorities for approval.
That's right.
Which means that everything that we see in this city has gone through the hands of an architect, ideally. Right? Hypothetically. Correct. But then we can say a majority of the buildings that we see in the city have gone through an architect. And the architect ought to have considered all those things.
Yes.
All right. This Nairobi was a swamp.
Yes.
Nairobi has this kind of soil. Nairobi, as it's developing, it has now this kind of new challenges. As an architect who's then designing the solution for your client, how come we have these problems?
Thank you, Eric. Now, that problem is beyond an individual architect. Is beyond an individual client. That's why we have governments. And the government is supposed to have a helicopter view of the whole thing and say, look, if you build in this area, the impact on your neighbor is this, the impact downstream is the other. So yes, there's a role for all of us. And as the Architect Alliance, that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to see, we've seen that as an individual architect, as Emmanuel Gono architect, there's nothing I can do. I can do a perfect design for my client, but if the neighbor has done something which is going to impact on me, I'm still in problems. So we need to look at it collectively, not just as architects, but as a people, the people of Nairobi. We need to revisit the spirit of this city, take charge, take control, and be able to do work that will not become moribund within a short period of time.
Are you saying that the alliance that you belong to doesn't have a voice? That you don't have any influence?
Well, I'll tell you something, City, about architects. We tend to be a bit insular. Most of us
and how useful is that?
Most of us are introverted. You know, if you're dealing with creative stuff, most creatives are introverted.
We keep being told that.
Yeah, and unlike lawyers who are in your face, they'll be all over. Architects tend to remain in their little space, and that's what we are saying as the alliance, that this has to stop. We need to start coming out there. We need to share our ideas with the populace. We need to be more impactful in society. We have not been.
Yes, I thank you for admitting that, because you see, if we take the view that many of the structures we see here, the majority, let's say, have had an architect behind them, it means that the people in your association, those who preceded you, have always sat at the same tables as the high and mighty in this country. And those are the decision makers. And you're saying that at that level, one cannot lobby and influence someone to understand, because the knowledge you have, not everybody else has. In fact, most of us don't have it.
Yeah.
That it can't. Forget the policies and conferences, that at an individual level, you cannot get this across so that someone understands that, you know something, what you are allowing is, in the long run, not going to help anybody. In fact, it'll cause us more harm than good, because you understand it and you know it, and you will be taken seriously. If someone takes you seriously enough to allow you to put up a 20-story building, surely, are you saying they won't take you seriously enough when you explain to them that this building is good, yes, but what we ought to do...
Just factoring your neighbors will
Yes,
come.
they've been listening to you all the time. What stops them from listening to you?
Thank you, City. Now, it's an interesting thing. When devolution came, for me, I felt that devolution was a stillbirth. Why? Because devolution is not about politics. You see, power should not be just in political hands. There is economic power, there is moral power, there is technical power. All those needs to be devolved to the right people. Unfortunately, in our country, power is concentrated in a few people, mostly the politicians, and they will not listen to anyone most of the time. It is difficult to get through to them. You have heard in the last couple of months, our top leaders, including the president, including the governor of Nairobi, talking about us having 50 floors, us having 20 floors or 30 floors or whatever, those height restrictions. They've said those as politicians, and people have received them. But you see, it's not about the height. It's about looking at the whole jigsaw of Nairobi. In this 30-floor building, how does it fit in? How does it feed into the neighbors? How does it work? So that is the thing we should be doing. Unfortunately, when you say that most of buildings in Nairobi have been done by architects, it's unfortunately not true. A lot of the eastern part of Nairobi, architects hardly go there. I think they have found their ways of wriggling and managing the system so that they may not have an architect. I have had case personally where I got an email from an organization that was saying, oh, you are an architect in this project and so on. And they sent me details which had been sent there, including a CV.
Yours?
Yes, which was not mine. The CV was completely fake.
But had your
name?
The
school where it had my name, it had my number, but in the school where I went, it was wrong, all those things.
Wow.
So there's a lot of crazy things happening in this country. And yes, as architects, we have to play our roles. But we need to understand that this thing, this city and the country as a whole is for all of us as citizens. And therefore, we need to have our voices heard. So not only politicians should make these decisions, because they affect all of us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's take a break. Architect Emmanuel Gono is from the Architects Alliance, and he's here today because we're talking about, okay, we've seen the impact of the floods in Nairobi, in the major cities. In Mombasa, we've seen it. In Kisumu, we've seen it. In Nakuru, we've seen it. All right, thinking forward, what is it that we should be thinking about our built environment as we make our decisions? 26 minutes to 10. Keep it here. We'll be back shortly. Let me tell you about the weather and traffic. 3 minutes to 10, we are looking at what then should we see going into the future to ensure that as we continue developing cities and towns and urban centers, we then are doing it the right way with a proper professional input and proper professional oversight into this. The Architects Alliance is a member of the Architectural Association of Kenya, and Architect Emmanuel Gono is our guest this morning. Architect, before we went into the break, we were just responding to what City had asked, as the Alliance, as the Architectural Association of Kenya, what kind of influence do you have? And you responded to this on the kind of political power that the politicians have and they wield. But then I want to piggyback on what City was asking in terms of influence. If you look at the major developments that are in this city, you will find that they are multi-million shilling and in some cases multi-billion shilling investments. The people who participate and who are doing this are people with influence. They have financial muscle. They can influence policy. The architects, because they must come to you, then you also have an influence on impacting them and telling them this is the challenge that you may encounter as I develop a solution for you. And we can work together towards addressing this challenge now and in the future. But this hasn't been happening. Or if it has been muted, it has been start-stop. What is it that the Architects Alliance is now doing to bring together the voice of architects, getting into the Architectural Association and bringing together everybody else who's involved in the built environment, like you said, the engineers, the quantity surveyors and everybody else, so that we address the current problem and we forestall any future problems?
Thank you, Eric. Yes, there's been a challenge with us trying to take our rightful space, and that's why the Architects Alliance has been formed, to make sure that the voice of the architect is heard and the technical support that the nation needs is availed. So we stop thinking more as architects who are available for individual clients and become a collective that is working for the good of all Nairobians. What tends to happen, of course, every architect is busy in his office and he has his briefs that he's working on. And probably we've not put in as much time in working together towards advocacy to change the environment. And that is one thing we are really focusing on now, moving forward. As far as resilience of the city is concerned, there's a lot of possibilities in places like China now. They're experimenting with something they're calling sponge cities, where you try to make sure that there's a lot of green space in your urban centers. You even have, if you have a surface, hard surface, it is absorbent,
right,
so that water does not go around everywhere and then cause damage. They had, around 1992, they had very serious floods, and from that they've responded and come up with methods of dealing with that. One of the problems we have when we are dependent on the political class, the politician would think about the next election. So they are 5-year thinking.
Yeah.
What we need as a nation is to be thinking 50 years, 100 years. How will it be? And that becomes now more focused on community, on the entire society, on future generations, and not just on me and you. That is the direction that the Architects Alliance wants to take going forward. And we are really happy to be with you today so that we start playing this agenda, because when we are together on this, it becomes not just for built industry professionals, it becomes for everybody. The media, if we understand what it means, then all of us can work together. Yes.
The good book tells us that for one to receive salvation,
yes,
they must first confess their sins and repent.
That's true.
Are you starting from that point?
Yes,
from
indeed.
Confessing.
Yes, indeed.
The failure of the architects, as professionals, in checking what we have, owning up to it, and saying that now going forward, we are going to live by the word.
Well, you put it very dramatically, but in real terms, what's happened is that architects have tended to be isolated. So we want to change that. And in a way, it's a confession that we haven't had the impact that we need to have. In a way, we have let our nation down by working in these small spaces. We need to be relevant to everybody in this country. For us to be relevant to everybody, it means that we have to work in a different way. So that is true. Indeed, it's a confession in that sense, that we have not worked together. We have not worked together with other people like media houses and the rest to bring out to everybody what the issues are. And therefore, then it's made it easy for policies that don't work to be passed. It's made it easy for the authorities, the local authorities, to do whatever they want without considering long-term effects.
Okay.
So that is where we are.
You know, I've got two questions.
Yes.
Architectural Association of Kenya.
Yes.
Are contractors members of that?
No, they are not.
Okay, why not?
Because there's a division. Indeed, the contractors have their own organization, which is just for contractors. This is just purely for professionals.
Yes,
the Architectural
but
Association.
The architects also have an association just for architects.
No, what's happening under the Architectural Association of Kenya, you have quantity surveyors. They have their own
Yes.
association. We have.
Yes,
we have
I
all
agree
those,
completely.
But as the Architectural
You
Association,
know, the reason why I'm asking you the question,
Correct.
all of you, whatever it is that you studied,
yes,
we realize it when a structure like this is put up.
correct. That's true.
That's where, that is your lived reality, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And it's not you who builds, it's the contractors who build.
Yes, true.
So why are they not members of the association? My second question.
Yes, correct.
I think you've heard my question. My
I've
second
heard it,
question
yes.
is this. If you are an organization and as you're currently structured,
Yes.
have you ever considered or have you in the past been engaged in influencing policy with regards to buildings, whether it is with zoning or what have you? Because if as you're quiet, you see, as you say you are, where the failure began was not with what we are seeing, but what was there and what was abrogated and what was changed, so that the monstrosities we now see have become our reality, because certain things that had been put in place were altered and changed. And the people who understood this thing better than all of us were you, the architects.
Correct. Okay, I'll start with the first question. You know, this country adopted the British model, and the British model separates very clearly construction from consultancy. Like the professionals and the contractors are completely separate. So the contractors are not in the Architectural Association because of that. And our
So
system...
there's a separation.
Yes, there's
What's
a
the
clear
importance of
separation.
that?
The importance is that the professionals check the contractors. They provide the design. They once that design is approved, they follow up and make sure the
So you're
contractor follows.
oversighting
Yes, we have oversight.
Okay.
So the contractor follows exactly what has been. So the professional then takes professional responsibility for the design and for implementation, but then they are the responsibilities of the contractor. So that is why contractors are not part of the Architectural Association of Kenya. Now, in terms of influence on policy, Again, you know, I know Eric wants me to say mea culpa. And I'll say though that because we've not made enough effort in terms of influencing policy. And that's why we are really strong on that at this moment. We are looking at all these documents from the past, as I told you about the Nairobi we want. We are looking, you would be surprised, City, that in 1962, there was a document produced called the Kenya We Want. Have you ever heard that? 1962, before independence. Yes. So those documents, you can't get them. So you don't know, you know, because we come up with a document and there's no tracking, there's no following, whether it's been implemented, the document is prepared, gathers dust somewhere. We don't want that kind of scenario.
But you know something, you've just accused your association. Because the form in which it existed in 1962,
Yes.
should they not have taken the position of being the guardians of such things?
Well, the AAK actually came into existence in 1967. However,
And before then?
Before then, I think they were just operating individually.
There was no association that
there was no
brought
association.
together architects.
No, there wasn't. There were very few anyway.
You've just escaped the bullet.
Yes, but what it needs, Eric, there have been all these failures in the past. And Winston Churchill said that the farther back you look, the farther forwards you'll see.
Yeah.
So the Architects Alliance is starting to look back all the way. And we see what hit us. How did we go astray? And part of the problem is that we've ceded too much power to politicians who think about 5 years. And that is an indictment of not only the architects, is of everybody, including you, Eric, and City. We are all guilty because we've given these guys too much power. And when there's a vacuum, they feel it.
So you've decided that Eric and I are now honorary architects.
Yes. You have been, I'll get you a number.
But architect, so right now, now that you're looking forward, now that you're saying, all right, so we are learning where we made our mistakes.
Correct.
So we can correct and make sure we don't go forward.
Yes.
How are you engaging? There's several pieces of legislation. For example, there's a building code that's, been in Parliament. There's a conversation about the Nairobi new plan that has been there for Nairobi.
Yes.
Regulations for implementation of the new plan that are currently before the County Assembly.
Correct.
Is the Architects Alliance involved in this?
Yes, we are engaging with all the documentation that is there. We have a secretariat, we collect it, and we see. And where there is an issue that is of interest, we always send memoranda to these people and tell them, look, our position is this is how it should be done. And we want to ramp that up and try to, at some point now, be producing this as a document that is available to everybody in a language that everybody can understand.
Okay, let's start with the current,
yes.
All right?
Yes.
The governor of Nairobi has ordered an audit on the buildings, just to see the structural integrity of all the buildings that we have in this Nairobi, looking back into how the approvals were made, what are they following the approved plans and all. Is the Alliance involved in this? Or have you put yourselves into that room to say that we want to be involved in this audit?
Now, that audit, to me, is a very strange thing. Because you're talking about, let's say, a court of law has made judgments of a period. Then the court of law says that now we are auditing our judgments that we had over the last 5 years. Does that sound sensible to you?
Yes, it does.
How?
It does because when you have an appellant court, that's an audit court.
Yes, appellant. But,
yes.
But this is actually the same court. They say the Supreme Court is saying now we are auditing all our judgments as a Supreme Court.
We can argue that it's a different government within the county or even a different government at the national level. So the point you're making is indeed a valid one.
Yes.
Insofar as if we were to look at decisions that were made in the time of this government, then your argument would be absolutely
right. Yes.
But if decisions were made in governments prior to this one, then they would very well, because the argument that we would have, but surely the civil servants were involved in all this, the same people who are there. I would say yes, but you see, the leadership is different.
Correct.
So the leadership would now be providing the sort of questions and answers which are being sought for things that happen outside whatever the jurisdiction now. They'll be blamed for it, if you ask me.
Yes.
And now this is a way of saying, this one, in all honesty, this is what happened. Because if we're talking about where the rains are beating us, you're going to go back to that time when Musalia Mudavadi was Minister for Local Authority. Okay? When many of these ordinances, and we have on zoning, simply just went all over the place and then nowhere. Okay?
Absolutely.
And sometimes it is necessary, as you say correctly, to go that far to understand.
But then, are you saying that the structure right now of the audit is what you have a problem with, or do you have a problem with the whole thing of auditing?
My thinking is that audit is diversionary. It is to help these guys run away from their responsibility now. What they are supposed to be doing is following setting up a system for Nairobi where we can have those local plans for these areas, make sure they are implemented to the letter of the law now. But they are not doing it now. So they are saying, no, by the way, back there were so many problems, so that's where we are focusing. So then it makes us focus on the past and forget the present. So yes, while it may be an important thing, but I don't think it's the most important thing for the...
What should we be doing now?
What we should be doing, first of all, is to prepare local area plans, following the new plan, and say, within this area, this is what can be done. So that whoever comes there as a developer, it's clear what you can do, what you cannot do. But you see now, like there's this thing called change of user, which has been abused everywhere. So you get a board saying, oh, there's proposed change of use from this to the other. Now, look, if you are investing, you are an investor, you've invested at some place, you think that if it's a development, it's something which will last 50, 100, even 200 years.
Yeah.
So you need to have an idea, in 20 years, how will this neighborhood be?
The neighborhood will look like this.
That is what we need to have. Because otherwise, how do you invest this thing, which will be there for 200 years? After 2 years, the whole place has changed. It is not what you had before.
You see now why it is that your association, apart from simply admitting their faults and their wrongs and asking for forgiveness, this is where now you have an opportunity to do what only you can do.
Correct.
Because what we're discussing here, the built environment, nobody understands it better than the architects. It's just a simple fact.
Very true, yes.
Your training and everything, other people don't have it.
Yes.
Now, if you, the experts in this field, are quiet, what are the rest of us supposed to do?
We will not move.
Yeah, you will not move.
So if you see that the approach that's being taken now by the administration is wrong, do you have a counter proposal?
Yes.
Have you taken it to the assembly?
We haven't yet, but you see, this is a recent development, so we don't want to rush. But we've looked at it, and we see what the intention is. But the most, I'm telling you, in 1993, if we had looked at those and implemented, we would not be where we are. So you see, this short-term thinking and short-term work is what has put us in a bad place in Nairobi, and in fact the whole of Kenya. We need to think long-term. We need to think 50 years, 100 years. How will it be?
Right.
Then city can go and develop. If he wants an apartment, he'll develop an apartment because he knows this area is for apartments. The sewer system will hold it. The roads are sufficient for it and everything. The other day there was a demonstration of people complaining about unplanned development. This is what they are saying, and they are right, because you need to have, for you to plan. This is a long-term investment. It's not something you go and build, and then suddenly the whole neighborhood has changed, and you are playing catch up.
But you know even beyond that, there's something very interesting in that what they call beacon to beacon building.
Yes,
where your neighbor might as well live in your house. You can wake up each morning and just stretch your arm and you'll be greeting your neighbor.
Your neighbor, yes.
Yes.
That's
Which means whatever happens in your neighbor's house, as I said, might as well happen in your house, because you hear everything.
Yep.
You know what they are cooking.
And this has happened under the watch of the politicians and the professionals.
Yes.
All right? Now the professionals are saying, okay, guys, this needs to stop.
Yes.
And I applaud you for that.
Yeah.
What I'm feeling and I'm not hearing is the plan then going forward.
Yes.
Because you are the people who can think ahead.
Yes.
That's your training.
Correct.
You planners think ahead. Engineers, structural engineers think ahead. But we are not hearing any concrete proposal on the table from the professionals saying this is how we shall engage. Because the issue of saying we need to, we hear that. When Kidero and his administration were getting the support from JICA to develop the new plan, we had, we need to think ahead for Nairobi. We need to look ahead for Nairobi. We had the same thing.
Yeah.
We've had the same conversations happening around everything else. We need to think about, this country looking forward. The population of Nairobi is going to be X number of people by X number of years. Everybody's thinking ahead. But what are they doing? So my question is, what exactly does the Architects Alliance have on the table in terms of a plan that says, this is number one, we'll enter at this point, we want to influence policy, and this is our proposal that changes the policy immediately, this is our approach, we are going to the county assembly, we are going to the national assembly, we shall then present these proposals, and we shall follow up going forward. What are those concrete proposals?
Yes, we are still working on those proposals. We are trying to join the dots. There are many people also working in that space. Like we've been engaging with Frederick Albert Stiftang. They are working on what it will be like, what Nairobi will be in 2070. And that is interesting. Those kind of engagements we are having. But as far as coming up with a comprehensive policy, it will take a lot of resources, it will take a lot of time. Actually, that's what governments are there for. So we can propose that this is the way to go, and we will be willing to lend our expertise, and the government should listen. Now, at this stage, we are trying to just knock down the doors of the government and tell them, please listen to us. Listen, just listen. I think the current government, in my opinion, has a big deficit in listening to citizens. It has a big deficit. They come up with a proposal, and you take it or leave it. And they are not the ones who are going to live with these things. It is us. So there's no harm. It doesn't show weakness if you listen. But sometimes it's because you are handicapped. So we are just at a point where we are trying to get the government.
You're trying to convince them on why they need to listen to us.
Yes, they need to listen to us. So far, we have not succeeded in that, but we are working hard on it.
Okay.
If they can listen to all of us, not just architects, everyone, it will really help. There's the concept of a just city.
Yeah.
That has been worked on for quite a while in this country. Though the findings have not been disseminated, but the whole idea about the city should not be leaning towards one side, beneficial to some people, and then the rest are the underclass who don't feel anything. And we need to look at the history of how Nairobi was developed. The first master plan for Nairobi, 1948, was by Thornton White, and it was for a racially divided city. And we have not moved from there.
We're still there.
We haven't.
We're dividing people on class,
yes,
and physical ability,
yes,
and all.
And finances.
Architect, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Architect Emmanuel Gono is from the Architects Alliance. We've been talking about the built environment and what we need to see going forward. Thank you for tuning into the Situation Room today. Tomorrow, Finance Bill Tuesday. Have a lovely one. It's 10 a.m.
Spice up your life